Well, hello everybody. Good day. This is Joe Van Cleave, and welcome to the results from Typing Assignment No.6. I know there was a lot of anticipation to see the results of this assignment. Hope you guys didn't have to wait too long, and I hope you had plenty of time to get your assignments done and entered. And right now, it looks like everybody got their assignment in. I didn't see any stragglers, and I was able to download all of the images. So, with that said, let's get into the results. So, in case you didn't know, or in case you didn't participate directly, Typing Assignments is a series that we started that is encouraging people to use their typewriters for actual writing and to exercise our writing chops, to get in the mode of having assignments every week and a half or so, and being able to work with our typewriters as a writing tool for creative writing, creative expression. And Typing Assignment No.6 was about writing a one-page assignment about a notable person in your life. That notable person could have been a good notable person or a negative notable person. But the idea is we'd like to hear a story. Humans are storytelling people, and we love stories, and we derive stories from our life experience. And so I'm looking forward to reviewing all of the results. And without any further ado, let's get into the slideshow. Well, all told, we had 14 entries to Typing Assignment 6, and I'll start with the first one. Diane Mayer's piece was written on a 1947 Royal Quiet Deluxe. We had several Royal Quiet Deluxes used in this assignment. Her piece was about photographer Tillman Crane, who is a very skilled large format platinum, palladium photographer, printer, who teaches workshops. And Diane has taken his workshops, has been mentored by him, and she herself is a photographer with a 5x12 format, large format camera. I really like this line that she has in her piece where he helped her to see and understand what others saw in her work. And she felt that was very important to understand where the direction of her work was going, to see what her clients, if you will, were seeing in her work. And what she says most notably about Tillman Crane as a teacher and mentor is, I think that is the true mark of a teacher, to want their students to grow. And that's what Tillman Crane does. He enables his students to grow. And so this was a great story. I could definitely relate to this as a photographer who has thought about getting into platinum palladium but not done it. I really appreciate your story, Diane. Great work. Thanks. Next piece is John Monroe's. He wrote this on a 1963 Voss S24 with a really nice blue ink script font. It was a beautiful font. Typeface. Beautiful typeface. So his piece is about Zenny Lenny. That's the title. And this is John's brother-in-law, who is a man older than John, who was a musician, camp counselor, and he says about Lenny, he made everything better without making a big deal out of it. So Lenny was a methodical man. He traveled a lot. He was a writer. He was a successful screenwriter, a successful newspaper columnist. He was a huge hero in John's life and had a huge impact on him. He was one of these guys who was bigger than life, and I really appreciate your story about him, John. I really loved reading about this guy. You know, it's amazing the people that come into our lives who seem bigger than life and have a huge impact on us. And I appreciate what you wrote about him. And I have a sense that it's difficult to really write about him in only one page. But you did a great job of fitting it in there. I appreciate it. Next is David Cornelius' piece written on a 1960s ABC typewriter. And it's about this Mr. Ray Kersey, who was David's boss at his high school maintenance job. So David worked a high school maintenance job, and Mr. Ray Kersey was David's manager. And so Mr. Kersey recently passed away, but he had a great deal of impact on David's life and on his perspective. And he taught David several important lessons that he describes in this piece. One of them is about promptness. about always showing up on time and doing your best. And the other lesson was every job and every person is important. So Mr. Kersey's influence was about discipline and being a great worker and a great role model to other people. And so what he says about him, what David says about Mr. Kersey is, Mr. Kersey made the world a better place by being a better person. And it's such a great story. And these are the kinds of people that you really want to role model yourself after. And I can see, David, you chose a role model quite well. Good job. I really love this story. Darren Sundstrom's piece was written on a 1951 Underwood rhythm touch, and it's about Mr. Van Loon. So this was Darren's grade 3 teacher, who was a mentor and friend, and he taught his students how to think, how to question, and to never be satisfied, but always continue to learn. So there was this carpe diem kind of moment in Darren's life in autumn of 1979 in Mr. Van Loon's class when there was an awakening. It was kind of an intellectual awakening on Darren's part that was kind of encouraged by Mr. Van Loon. And this enabled Darren to kind of wake up into an intellectual awareness of life and what he wanted to do, and really energized his sense of learning and wanting to grow as a person. There is a reference in this piece to Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon. And what Darren says about Mr. Van Loon is, he granted us the august title of student, and we relished at the opportunity. So Mr. Van Loon was one of these teachers who made students want to learn. He gave them incentive to be self-motivated. And that's such a great story. And those are the kind of teachers we want. I really love this, Darren. Thank you. Andrew Nichols' piece was entitled Changes. And this is about the influence of the musician David Bowie, the influence that David Bowie was on Andrew's life. So Andrew has loved David Bowie's work all his life, and it's always carried him through the difficult times in his life. And as Andrew says, he spoke to me through those headphones as if he was singing just to me and me alone. And Andrew has loved David Bowie's work all his life and has continued to follow him even through the waning part of his career, and then was saddened, of course, to hear of Mr. Bowie's passing. But he says, but his music lives on to accompany my life. And I really like this. I happen to really like the work of Pink Floyd's lead guitarist David Gilmour. I love his work, I love his music and his talent. I don't know if he is as influential to me as David Bowie was to you, but I can really appreciate your appreciation of David Bowie. Thanks a lot, Andrew. I loved it. David Randall's piece was typed on an Antares Parva, and it's about Nadja, and Nadja is a black cat. And the black cat Nadja had a mistress, a lady, and that lady ended up marrying David. They became husband and wife. And David, in turn, made room in their house, in their home, for Nadja by building cat doors and having the whole thing set up. And Nadja was queen of the neighborhood. She owned her garden and her yard and made sure that all the neighborhood cats knew of it. And I like what David says. Nadja was the only royal highness among all of the other notable persons that David's known in his life. She was the royal highness of a cat. I love that story. It's great how animals like that can be such strong personalities. Okay, next was Richard Wood's piece written on a 1953 Olivetti Lettera 22, and Richard is using the pseudonym of Boran Hucklefinch, which I think is a great name. So Richard's piece is very humorous. So it is a takeoff on the story of Howard Carter's discovery of King Tut in Egypt, the archaeologist Howard Carter. And Richard's, or Boran's, title is Dour Qatar and the Search for Tank Tunahum. So you can see Tutankhamun there and Howard Carter in the title. This is really fun, imaginative, and what's great about it is that the assignment was to write about a notable person in your life, and this was a very funny way of doing it. I loved it, Richard. Thanks a lot. Oh man, you guys are funny. Okay, Dohang Michael Kitchen, and he wrote his piece on a 1951 Royal Quiet Deluxe. There's the other Royal Quiet Deluxe. So this is about Irma Henderson, who was a Detroit city councilor starting in 1972. And she had a very notable life as a person fighting for equality and justice, had a great influence on a lot of people, both in the Detroit area and nationwide. She was a real heroine in that movement. And in 1998, Michael took an opportunity to interview her and to write her memoirs. And in doing so, he had to interview a lot of her friends and associates. And in the process of all this, which took a long time, Irma and Michael's family became close, and she ended up mentoring Michael's daughter. It was a great story of how this heroine, this wonderful woman, became friends of your family and close to you, and I can see how much of an influence she had on your life. And it's great to read about these people who are indeed heroes, but if it wasn't for your story, we wouldn't know about her. So I really appreciate that. Andy Kev's piece was written on an Olympia SG-1 titled Jerry. Jerry is Jerry Garton, an aircraft mechanic for California Airways Flight School. And he was also a pilot and a flight instructor as well as an aircraft mechanic. So he became Andy's mentor as a pilot instructor. And so he was very influential in helping Andy to become a more skilled pilot. And Jerry then encouraged Andy to learn to ride motorcycles, and they ended up riding BMWs together on rides all around California, Nevada area, rides and rallies. So Jerry is kind of one of these people that lives a larger than life, adventure-filled life, wants to do everything. And so not only was he a pilot, a skilled instructor, an aircraft mechanic, a skilled motorcyclist, but he mentored Andy in sailboats. So they would go sailing in San Francisco Bay. Wow, what an adventure. So, unfortunately, in August of 1989, Jerry was killed when his motorcycle hit a deer. And after that, that was like this watershed moment in Andy's life. Andy gave up motorcycles. His life sort of settled down into, the more calm life of a family man. But he says, "It is said that it is better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. I love those adventures with Jerry, my best friend." And, this was a really sweet, sad story, because these kinds of friends and mentors are few and far between. They're only once in a lifetime, and I can really see and feel your loss. But I also appreciate knowing Jerry through your story. It was really, really great. Thank you. Diane Cox's piece was written on a Hermes 3000, which, by the way, is kind of important to the story. Her piece is titled "The Gentleman from Russia." And so the story starts with this snapshot photo taken in 1973 timeframe of Diane's family and their motorcycles, and this gentleman named Jim, who was a member of their motorcycle club. And Jim was an older fellow who had a kind of a great influential presence in their life, and he ended up on and off for a period of about a decade living with her family. Jim was from Russia. As a young man, he experienced the Russian Revolution of 1917 and had to flee through Mongolia and Siberia, eventually into China, and he eventually immigrated into the U.S., had an education at some very notable schools, and became a chemical engineer. And Diane says of Jim that Jim reminds her of the character Humbert in Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. And what's interesting about it is Jim wrote for Nabokov on a Hermes 3000. And Diane is writing about this today on a Hermes 3000. Jim was a great, unforgettable character who had a larger-than-life kind of story himself, and I really loved reading about him. Thank you very much, Diane. Okay, next is Michael Rasmussen's piece. His was also written on a Hermes 3000, and it's called Quiet Advice. And this is about where Michael started cycling for his health. And boy, I can certainly relate to that. Boy, I need to start doing something because my health is not getting any better. But after he became an avid cyclist and got healthy, he learned of this sport of long-distance marathon bicycling called radineering, if I pronounce that right. And he wanted to try radineering. And so he befriended this man named Kent, who was a veteran bicyclist in Radinauer. And so they rode together, and Michael was sort of mentored by him. And Kent, though, had an appetite for a lot of different kinds of sport. And Kent went on to try other types of cycling challenges like bicycle messengering and riding a single-speed bicycle over the Rocky Mountains. These kind of rare kind of feats of endurance and ability. But he was always anxious to learn new stuff and have new challenges and finding new interests. So one of the interests he started getting involved in, this is Kent I'm speaking about, he started getting involved in buying old manual typewriters from thrift stores and junk stores and experiencing the challenge of fixing them up and restoring them. And as he became successful at that, of course, his house began to get filled up with typewriters. He needed to find more room. He calls Michael and says, "Hey, would you like to adopt a typewriter?" And that's how it started for Michael. The rest is history, and even to this day, they still correspond back and forth via typewritten letter. That was a great story, and it ties into the whole typewriter thing so well. I really love that story. David Wells' piece was typed on a Smith Corona Silent Super, and it's about an elementary school principal. So David himself is an elementary school principal, but when he was a new principal, just new to the job, he was mentored by another principal named Ken. Now, Ken was a veteran police officer and a veteran principal. He was very strong and was willing to defend and stick up for his teachers, even amongst a very agitated, at times, community of parents. He was a real colorful character, Ken was, and he exhorted his students to excel. He would drive his older elementary school children over to high school to attend classes just to get them further prepared. He would take in foster kids, foster children. He would teach them life skills. Ken was a great person, one of those giant people who did so much good, and he was a great mentor for David, and I'm sure David is all the better as a principal because of him knowing Ken. That was a great story. Kevin Kittle's piece was typed on an Olivetti Underwood Type Master, and it has a beautiful typeface. I really liked looking at this piece. And this is titled Bob Barrett Taught Me to Breathe. I really love this story. So Bob Barrett was an elementary school band teacher without a classroom, and he encouraged Kevin Kittle as a young man to take up the slide trombone. I think it was in 4th grade. And so Bob Barrett was the lead trumpeter for Stan Kenton's band, right, the band leader. And he was recorded on 7 of Stan Kenton's albums. So Bob Barrett was a giant in jazz. And so Bob Barrett taught and mentored Kevin on the slide trombone until Kevin won the Al Winter Award at 8th grade graduation because of Bob's mentoring. And what I liked about it was he said, the most important lesson that Bob Barrett taught me was how to embrace life by breathing deeply. Now, the breathing deeply part is the technique of breath on as you're playing a brass instrument. And but it's also there's sort of a thing in there about breathing deeply as a way to calm yourself and a way to find energy throughout life, right? There's a bigger lesson than just music in that. So Mr. Barrett was a magnificent man, Kevin writes, who chose to waft some of the rarefied air of a virtuoso into school kids inhaling their first breath of life. Wow, what a finishing line. I really loved your piece, Kevin. Thank you very much. And finally, the last piece was a little thing that I pecked out on this very typewriter, this Underwood Portable. And this was about my father, Chester Van Cleave. And so Dad died in 2007 at the age of 90. And we didn't know this until we were going through his effects afterwards. But Dad was a war hero. He had several Bronze Stars. He never told us, okay? So the mark of a true hero is someone who doesn't brag about it. Now, Dad was born on the ranch in 1917. The ranch was what's called the East Mesa, where Albuquerque's northeast or southeast part of town is, over by the base. That was all rangeland. And my grandfather homesteaded a cattle ranch, and Dad was born there as a young man. Dad went through the Depression as a young man, the Great Depression, and he went into World War II, became a airplane mechanic for the U.S. Army Air Corps, and was stationed in North Africa with the British 8th Army, and went up through Sicily and Italy. And then he took sick, got out of the war, went back to the hospital, the Veterans Hospital here in Santa Fe, recuperated. After the war, Dad had a short period of time when he went out to California in the late 40s, about the same time that Jack Kerouac and the Beats were out there getting started with their stuff. And Dad rode a motorcycle around San Francisco and had his kind of fun time. And then he came back to Albuquerque, settled down, and he got a job out on the base with this new project where they were building a secret nuclear weapons underground storage facility in the Manzano Mountains, and Dad ran the warehouse out there while they were building that facility. And because of that, Dad got a job with the Defense Atomic Support Agency, which was an agency of the federal government, field command, and Dad ran the cataloging section and actually set up all the cataloging of parts for the nuclear weapons. And that Dad kind of did that for the rest of his career. So he had kind of a big influence on us kids as a father who had this World War II experience, who worked in this defense business during the Cold War. But he was a hero to us because when I was 5 years old, I was the youngest of three boys. Our mother died. Dad's working full time, is left as a widower with three kids. That was his real heroism right there, is how he took care of us. He eventually remarried, and that helped us to continue growing. But Dad was a hero in so many ways. And so anyways, all of us who wrote these stories had these kind of great characters in our lives who had powerful influences on us. And I thought it was a great opportunity that we could share about our influential people in our lives. And I thank you all for your participation. And so hopefully in the next few days, I will come up with a video, an assignment for typing assignment number 7. But as always, I really appreciate you guys and your writing and your sharing of your creativity. And until next time, you guys have yourselves a great day.